Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's happening in the economy in Russia, and specifically to talk about what's happening with the population, because Rosstat, which is the official statistics agency in Russia, so these are not my figures, don't bother sending me any comments saying you're talking rubbish, these are the official statistics. Rosstat have said that in the first half of 2024, the birth rate has been the lowest that it's been seen in Russia for 25 years. And in June itself, the birth rate fell below 100,000 babies for the first time ever in Russia's history. And the reason that this is a major problem is because Russia also has an extremely high death rate. And that means that the population is now declining rapidly. And when you add on top of that the fact that a lot of people are leaving Russia, it's experiencing net emigration at the moment. That means that the population is in rapid decline, and this is causing major problems for the Russian economy. According to data published by the statistics service Rosstat, 599,600 children were born in Russia in the first half of 2024, which is 16,000 fewer than the same period in 2023 and the lowest since 1999. In June, the number of newborns fell 6% to 98,600, which is the first time the number has fallen below 100,000, Russian media reported. Russia's natural decline of population has accelerated in 2024, with 325,100 deaths recorded between January and June, which is 49,000 more than in the corresponding period last year. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said, "This is catastrophic for the future of the nation." And Nina Ostanina, the head of the Committee for the Protection of Families at the Duma, Russia's lower house of parliament, told the state RIA news agency that a special demographic operation is needed to improve the birth rate. "We must organise ourselves and conduct another special operation," she said. "Just like a special military operation, a special demographic operation." Now, if you follow the channel, you'll be aware that Russia is currently experiencing a workforce shortage. It simply doesn't have enough people to fill all of the job vacancies. And this is partly as a result of the fact that Russia has converted itself into what's called a wartime economy, whereby the Kremlin is sponsoring lots of companies to produce things for the war in Ukraine. Those companies are therefore making exceptional profits and are able to offer higher salaries to attract in more people to be able to produce all of the things for Ukraine. And that's causing a wage spiral because the people who are leaving jobs to go and join those state-sponsored companies are leaving behind vacancies, and those businesses are now having to offer higher salaries to attract in more people. And in addition to all of that, Russia is also having to offer bonuses and higher salaries for people to go and fight in Ukraine. So we've got a wage spiral at the moment that's leading to a shortage of people in the workforce. And this declining birth rate and rising death rate is going to exacerbate that. But that isn't the only problem that Russia is facing, because it's got some fundamental issues that mean that the workforce is now out of balance, and there is a serious risk that there's going to be a huge amount of pressure applied to the Russian economy over the course of the next few years as a result of the fact that it's now got an ageing population and it doesn't have enough people coming through the workforce. So let's start off by looking at what's happening with Russia's population clock. Now, just before we go on any further today, I want to talk to you about today's sponsor, NordVPN, who I use on a daily basis and who are offering Joe Blogs viewers an exclusive deal. Unfortunately, cybercrime is becoming a daily occurrence. We're hearing about it more and more. And in fact, if you follow the channel, you'll know that this channel itself was hacked by cybercriminals. And if you want to avoid the same thing happening to you and your finances, you need to start using NordVPN. By using NordVPN, every time you log on, you'll be protected from all sorts of criminal activity. And don't override it like I did and expose yourself to a hacking incident. I spend a lot of my time researching articles to put together my videos. And unfortunately, I find that sometimes I'm geo-blocked from those articles. I'm not in the right country. However, when using NordVPN, you'll be able to access information, data, news articles, TV shows, movies, and sports matches that are not available in your region. And the great news is that Joe Blogs viewers are being offered an exclusive deal, which you can access by clicking in the link below. And the great news is that it offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, so if you're not happy, you can get your money back within the first 30 days. This table shows what's referred to as Russia's population clock. So if we start off by looking at Russia's current population of 144.7 million people, that's as of September 2024. Now, in terms of the movement of population, there are three different factors that influence it: the number of births, the number of deaths, and what's happening with net migration, which is measured by looking at the number of people coming into the country, which is immigration, and the number of people leaving the country, which is emigration. So we start off by looking at the births. The number of births per day currently in Russia is 3,478, and that compares to the number of deaths, which is 5,100, which means that on a net basis, the population of Russia is reducing by 1,622 people every single day. However, the situation is actually worse than that, because Russia is currently experiencing net emigration. More people are leaving than coming into the country, and the current figure for net emigration is 487 people per day. And when you include that figure, the number of people in Russia is reducing by 2,109 people every single day. And what that means is that since the start of January 2024, the Russian population has reduced by 533,577 people, which obviously represents a problem from an economic point of view because those people are no longer contributing to the Russian economy. And if we look at what those statistics mean in terms of seconds and minutes, currently in Russia, one baby is being born every 25 seconds. However, one person is dying every 17 seconds, and one person is leaving the country every 2.95 minutes. And all of that means that Russia is losing one person from its population every 41 seconds. Now, just to put those figures into context, I thought it was worth comparing them against what's happening in the USA. So the current population in the USA is 345.8 million. The number of babies being born every day in the USA is 10,005. The number of people dying is 8,341. And the USA is also attracting in 3,521 migrants every day. All of which means that the population in the USA is increasing by 5,186 every day. And since the 1st of January 2024, the population has increased by over 1.3 million people. And looking at those statistics in terms of seconds and minutes, a baby is born every 9 seconds in the US, somebody dies every 10 seconds, the USA is gaining somebody through net immigration every 25 seconds, and all of that means that the population is increasing by one person every 17 seconds. Developing economies are often characterised as having high birth rates and also high death rates. And as an economy develops and becomes more affluent, the birth rate and the death rate comes down. This chart shows the birth rate for the USA dating back to 1950, and the reason that I wanted to show this is just to show how the birth rate does change as an economy develops. Back in 1950, the birth rate per 1,000 of population was 24.3 in the USA. However, as you can see, there was a sharp reduction in the birth rate in the 1960s and the 1970s as the economy started to develop and individuals in the USA became more affluent and better educated. And by 1979, the birth rate was down to 14.8. And over the last 45 years, the birth rate has continued to decline, and the current rate in the USA is 12 births per 1,000 of population. And I think it's worth noting here that the changes in the birth rate in the USA have been relatively gradual over the course of the last 70 years or so. This chart shows the movement in the birth rate in Russia dating back to 1950. And you can see that in 1950, the birth rate was 27.4 per 1,000 of population, so fairly similar to what it was in the USA. However, there was a rapid decline in the birth rate in Russia during the 1960s, and by 1968, the birth rate was down to 14.9 per 1,000, which is equivalent to where the USA was in 1979. And you can see that the shape of this chart is far steeper than it was for the USA. The rapid decline in the birth rate was identified as a problem in Russia, and a variety of initiatives were introduced to encourage people to have more children. And by 1988, the birth rate had increased to 16.1, which was actually higher than the 15.6 in the USA at that time. Now, the end of the 1980s and the start of the 1990s represented a period of significant change for Russia, and the Soviet Union was finally broken up in 1991. And the breakup of the Soviet Union and the relaxation of the communist policies and the introduction of more capitalist ideas led to a period of significant uncertainty in Russia and also led to a deep depression. And as a result of those issues, the birth rate fell significantly. And by 1999, the birth rate had fallen to 8.9 per 1,000 of population, which compared to 14.2 in the USA at that time. Now, once again, the authorities in Russia identified this as a major problem and introduced more initiatives to encourage people to have children. And by 2014, the birth rate had increased to 12.9, which was actually higher than the 12.4 births per thousand in the USA for 2014. However, over the past 10 years, the birth rate has started to come down again and is now sitting at 11.1 per 1,000 of population. And one of the problems from Russia's point of view is when you look at the shape of this chart, it's got these significant dips. And those dips mean that Russia has years where there has been a very low number of births. And those dips in population are very difficult to be able to offset. This chart shows the death rate in the USA dating back to 1950. What this shows is that back in 1950, 9.6 people were dying per 1,000 of population. However, over the following 60 years, there was a general reduction in the death rate, and by 2008 it was down to 8.1 per 1,000. Now, interestingly, over the past 16 years, there's been an increase in the death rate in the USA, and it's currently sitting at 9.2 per 1,000, which is the equivalent of where the USA was back in 1974. And at first glance, you may be thinking, that seems a bit unusual because obviously the USA is a developed economy. It has a good health service, so people should be living longer. The shape of this graph is common for developed countries because there comes a point when you've just got more and more old people, and by definition, those older people will have a higher chance of dying. If we now have a look at what's been happening to the death rate in Russia, back in 1950, 12.2 people out of every 1,000 were dying, and that figure reduced to an all-time low of 8.1 in 1963. However, between 1963 and 2003, there was a sharp increase in the death rate, and this is very different to what we just looked at in the USA, where there was a gradual reduction between 1950 and 2008. And by 2003, the death rate was up to 16 per 1,000 of population, which was actually one of the highest rates in the whole of the world at that time. Between 2003 and 2018, the death rate did come back down to a low point of 12.7 per 1,000. However, over the past 6 years, it started increasing again and is currently sitting at 13.1, which compares to the current rate in the USA of 9.5. And just to put the current death rate in Russia into perspective, this chart shows the 10 developed countries with the highest death rates in the world currently. And you can see that right at the top of this list, surprisingly, is Bulgaria with a death rate of 15.6, followed by Ukraine, not surprisingly, at 15.2. Latvia comes in at number 3, followed by Lithuania, Romania, Lesotho, Serbia, Croatia. Russia comes in at number 9 on this table, and Hungary is ranked at number 10. So what does all of this mean for Russia and its economy? Well, there are a number of negative factors that Russia is now facing as a result of the fact that its population is currently declining and is also expected to continue declining over the course of the next 50 to 100 years. This graph shows Russia's historic and projected movements in population between 1950 and 2100. And what this shows is that back in 1950, Russia had a population of 103 million, and that population increased to a peak of 149.4 million in 1991, which was when the old Soviet Union was broken up and Russia became independent again. The population fell to a low point of 143.8 in 2008, and then rose back again to 146.5 million in 2019. However, the current population is 144.7 million. And as you can see from the projections beyond 2024, it's expected that the population will continue reducing as a result of that low birth rate, high death rate, and what's happening with net migration. By 2030, the population is expected to be down to 142 million. By 2040, it's expected to fall to 138 million, and by 2050, it will be down to 136 million. Now, it doesn't automatically follow that a reducing population will mean that you'll have falling GDP and a reducing economy. If you can improve your productivity, if through technology you can improve the output of all of your companies and grow their revenue and profits, then an economy could thrive. However, as we've talked about in many videos before, Russia is currently experiencing a problem with regards to access to technology. As a result of the sanctions that have been applied against Russia, Russia can no longer access cutting-edge technology that's being developed by the West. And let's face it, most of that technology is coming out of the West. It isn't coming out of China. China is doing its best to catch up. It's copying a lot of the high-tech stuff that's being developed in places like the USA, Korea, the Netherlands, and the UK. But it isn't at the forefront of that technology. And those Chinese companies are now also facing the threat of secondary sanctions if they're found to be supplying Russia with any of that technology. So from Russia's perspective, they don't have access to the latest tech, which means that they're falling behind in terms of global development. So it's going to be difficult from Russia's perspective to be able to continue growing their economy and achieving all of the growth that they want to with a declining population. However, the situation is actually much worse than that, because when you look at the demographics of what's happening in Russia right now, it's a really worrying trend. This chart shows Russia's population pyramid, and if you follow the channel, I'm sure you'll have seen these pyramids before. They break down the population into different age groups, from 0 to 4 at the bottom, all the way up to 100 plus at the top. And we've got two different colours here. The blue section on the left shows the number of males in each of those age categories, and the red section on the right shows the number of females. Now, before we get into the details of Russia's population pyramid, let's have a look at the population pyramid for the USA, which is a well-developed economy. Now, as you can see here, despite the fact that this is called a population pyramid, the shape of this chart isn't actually pyramidical. It looks more rectangular. And what we've got here is a similar number of people in each of the age categories between 0 and 70. There's actually a slight narrowing at the bottom as a result of the birth rate being lower. However, that's being offset by net migration. When people move to the USA, they don't tend to move as a baby. They tend to want to come to work in the USA for economic purposes, and so they tend to be in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. So the slight narrowing of the pyramid at the bottom isn't having an overall impact on the USA's population. That's being offset by migration. And if we look at the top of this pyramid from 70 and above, you can see that there is a narrowing as people start to die as they get older. And the overall summary of this pyramid is that it's very well balanced. If we now have a look at the population pyramid for Russia, you can see that it doesn't have the same balance. If we start off by looking at the top 2/3 of the pyramid, from 35 upwards, you can actually see that it's moderately pyramid shaped. The percentage of both the male and female population from 35 to 39 is the biggest age group, representing 4.4% each of the population. And in each of the following years, there is a narrowing. So we've got a reduction in the number of people as they get older. So the top section of this chart is definitely more pyramid shaped than the USA. However, if we look at the bottom section, you can see the impact of the reduction in the birth rate that we've just talked about, and also the increase in the death rate. And there is a pronounced narrowing of the pyramid. And the smallest age groups for both men and women are 0 to 4, 20 to 24, and 25 to 29. And that significant reduction in the number of young people in Russia represents a serious problem, because unlike the USA, Russia is not offsetting that reduction in the number of people through migration. In fact, Russia is actually losing people. More Russians are leaving the country than people are coming into the country to work. And that represents a problem from Russia's point of view, because they now have an aging population. As time moves on, they will have more people who are starting to retire than they have entering the workforce. So we've got a top-heavy pyramid here. But the other thing to notice about this chart is that the right-hand side, the red section, is larger than the blue section. And that's partly down to the fact that the death rate is higher for men than it is for women. Life expectancy is lower for men than it is for women. And also, Russia has lost a lot of men in various wars over the past 30 years. And one of the significant risks that Russia is now facing as a result of the fact that it has more females than males is that it has a differential in terms of the retirement age. This chart compares the current retirement age for women for countries in the G20, which are notionally the 20 largest economies in the world. And as you can see, the lowest retirement age, surprisingly, is in China, where it's 55 for women. And the second lowest retirement age in the G20 is in Russia, where it is 58. It's also 58 in Turkey and Indonesia. And when you compare the retirement age in Russia with the USA, where the retirement age for women is now 67. That represents a differential of 9 years, or 3,285 days. And if we have a look at the same statistics for men, you can see that the countries with the lowest retirement age in the world are Indonesia, where it's 58, followed by China, India, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, South Korea and Turkey, where it's 60. And in Russia, the official retirement age for men is 63, which is 4 years earlier than it is in the USA. So the official retirement age in Russia is 58 for women and 63 for men, which is a lot lower than it is in many countries around the world. We're talking 9 years earlier than places like the USA and Australia. And the problem that you have with that from an economic point of view is twofold. Firstly, those people tend to not work beyond their retirement age. So let's assume that all women in Russia retire at 58, that they don't carry on working, they don't get another job, they just all retire. What that means is that they are not contributing to the economy in terms of additional income and therefore paying more tax on that income. And so their contribution to the overall economy is probably less. Now, don't send me lots of comments saying retired people do contribute to the economy. I know that everybody who's retired does, because they're buying things, they're paying VAT, they're probably paying some tax on their pension if they're getting paid above the minimum rate for taxes. But in general terms, if you're not working, if you're retired, then generally speaking, you will contribute less to an economy than if you are working for an additional 9 years. So we've got a differential of 9 years for women and 4 years for men. So when you add all of that up across millions and millions of people, it makes a big difference. But the other side of the equation also has an impact on the economy, because if those retired people are taking state pensions, if they're being paid by the Kremlin, then they become a burden in terms of the economics, because the state has to find the money to be able to pay those pensions. And I know everybody contributes to pension schemes and that you pay your taxes over the lifetime of your work, and so you're entitled to that money. So I'm not trying to say anything negative about people who are retired, so please don't send me lots of comments about that. The point I'm trying to make is that once you retire, your contribution to the economy switches from overall being positive and adding money into the general coffers of the economy to taking your pension, being paid that money, and maybe you're then contributing in other ways. But overall, if you've got a large chunk of your population that's retiring each year, it becomes more challenging to grow your GDP. And that's the situation that Russia is now facing. And if we look at life expectancy levels, you can see that this is now becoming a major problem from Russia's point of view. This chart shows the movement in life expectancy levels in Russia for men and women dating back to 1950. The figures for men are shown in blue, figures for women are shown in orange, and the line chart across the top is the average. And what this shows is that back in 1950, men in Russia were expected to live to 51 years old, and females were expected to live to 58.9. Now, over the last 70 years or so, that has increased significantly, and today, men are expected to live until 67.5, and women are expected to live until 79.2. So what those figures tell us is that men in Russia are expected to live for around 4 years past their retirement age, but women are expected to live for 21.2 additional years past the point of their retirement. So they will be taking their pension from the state for over 20 years, and that's going to add a big burden. And when we looked at the population pyramid, you could see that there are more females than males in Russia. So having a lower retirement age and a higher life expectancy is increasing the burden on the Russian state. And as we move through the years, that burden is going to get bigger and bigger because we've got a falling birth rate and more people are living to an older age. And as we've been comparing everything between Russia and the USA so far, I thought it was worth showing the life expectancy in the USA currently. Back in 1950, it was expected that men would live to 65.4 years and women would live to 71. Today, men are expected to hit 77 years and women 82 years. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because I've been talking a lot about what's happening with the Russian population over the last couple of years. And we've got two different factors. Firstly, we've got what's happening as a result of the invasion of Ukraine, and there have been some really big impacts. We've had 1.2 million people decide that they didn't want to run the risk of being called up and sent to fight in Ukraine, so they've fled Russia over the last couple of years, and that's had a seriously negative impact on the workforce because firstly, there's been a reduction in the number of people available for work, but secondly, a lot of the people that left were the better educated and the more senior members of staff. So Russia proportionately lost more valuable people than just 1.2 million. They were contributing more per capita than the average contribution. So that's been a major negative from Russia's point of view. And obviously, in the war itself, people have been killed. Russia has lost hundreds of thousands of people. We don't know exactly how many. There's a big difference between the guesstimates and the officially published figures, but they have lost a lot of people. So the impact of the war has already been quite negative. But when you look at what's been happening over the last 50 or 60 years in Russia, it's been building problems for itself because the birth rate has been in decline. Firstly, it went down seriously as a result of the communist years, and we also then saw a reduction following the breakup of the Soviet Union. And in addition to that, the death rate is now on the rise again. Russia has one of the highest death rates in the world, and this isn't because of the war in Ukraine. This is because of lifestyle choices and just the fact that men in Russia don't live as long as they do in the rest of the world. So when you add together all of those factors and the fact that Russia is no longer an attractive place to move to from an economic point of view, in the past, lots of people from surrounding countries would move to Russia to earn money and send it back to their families. However, as a result of the war and the risk that immigrants now face of being conscripted and sent to Ukraine to fight, there's been a huge drop-off in the number of people wanting to go and work in Russia. So all of these factors are leading to a reduction in the population. And as we talked about earlier in the video, Russia doesn't have enough technology to be able to offset that reduction in people. It can't improve its productivity because it doesn't have access to cutting-edge technology. It's struggling with things like artificial intelligence, which are really providing a boost for a lot of businesses all around the world at the moment. Russia isn't in that cutting-edge technology world. It's not developing its own, and it can't access all of that from China because, firstly, China isn't developing that cutting-edge technology, and secondly, the companies that are producing tech are facing serious second sanctions from the West. And the reason I wanted to post this video today is that Russia has now announced that the figures for the first 6 months of 2024 are some of the worst that Russia has ever published. The birth rate is down to the lowest point at any time in the last 25 years. And in June itself, the number of babies being born fell below 100,000 for the first time ever. So this problem is accelerating from Russia's point of view. And when you look at what the long-term impact of that is, both on the workforce and the economy, it's very worrying from Russia's point of view. At the moment, they're struggling to find enough people to fill all the vacancies. They've created this wartime economy, which is providing a boost to GDP. However, they're now struggling to find enough people to fill all of those vacant jobs. And the longer that goes on, the more problems that will cause for those companies. But in addition to that, we've now also got a serious situation that's building with regards to the retired population in Russia. Women retire at 58 in Russia, and the female population is growing. We've got a lot of people in those older age categories, and each year there will be more and more people retiring. And that means that the state will have to pay all of those people pensions. Usually, in order to get the money to do that, you would tax all of your workforce. You take the money from the workforce and give it to the retired people. That's generally how it works. However, when you've got a shrinking population and you've got a reduction in the number of people in the workforce, that becomes more and more challenging. And the only way to keep funding it would either be to keep increasing taxes, which is going to cause possibly more people to leave the country. If you're getting overly taxed, then you may decide you don't want to stay around, you go and work somewhere else overseas. It will push away a lot of the migrants because you won't want to go there and be heavily taxed because there's no point. And if Russia gets to the situation where it can't fund those pensions from taxes, then the only other alternative it will have is to use its reserves, the National Wealth Fund. And as we've talked about in many previous videos, the National Wealth Fund is currently being drained to keep the war in Ukraine going. So as we go on, if this war continues over the next 6, 12, 18 months or so, what that's going to do is provide further pressure in terms of the Russian economy. It's going to further upset the fundamental balance of the Russian workforce, and it's going to drain Russian reserves further. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end, and here's something to put a smile on your face.